I had no business hiking alone in the woods at night, but stubbornness is a hell of a thing. The Appalachian Trail was supposed to be my solo victory lap. Months of planning had led to this moment. Just me, my boots, and the endless stretch of trail winding through the forest. It was meant to be freeing, a chance to escape the noise of city life, to remind myself that I could still do something brave. But that night, I was not feeling brave. I was feeling lost. The sun had dipped below the horizon faster than I'd expected, and with it went any hope of finding my way back to the campsite before nightfall. My flashlight beam cut through the encroaching darkness, but every shadow looked like a lurking figure, every rustling branch like a predator stalking me. I cursed under my breath as I checked my phone again. Still no service. No surprise there. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, a figure emerged from the trees ahead of me. "Lost, are you?" The voice was gruff, the kind that made you stop in your tracks. The man who stepped into my flashlight beam was older, maybe in his 60s, with a long coat that looked more like it belonged in a Civil War reenactment than out here. His face was weathered, lined with creases that seemed carved by years of hard living. Yeah, I admitted, too startled to lie. I was trying to get back to my campsite before dark. He tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "You're on the wrong trail for that. Heading deeper into the woods, not out." A chill ran through me. "Are you sure?" I thought. "Positive," he interrupted. "But if you keep going, you'll find it." My heart leapt with hope. "Find what?" "The campsite." "No," he said flatly. "The lantern." His words hung in the air like smoke. I stared at him, confused, but he didn't elaborate. "What lantern?" I asked, my voice shaking. He stepped closer, and I realized how tall he was, taller than he had seemed at first. He leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "If you see it, do not follow it. No matter what." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, the flashlight trembling in my hand. He didn't answer. Without another word, the man turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing into the darkness as if he had never been there at all. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart pounding. Was he messing with me? Trying to scare me? I shook my head and forced myself to move. I was not about to let some cryptic warning from a stranger keep me from finding my way back. But as I walked, the forest grew darker, the air colder, and my unease deeper. And then, in the distance, I saw it, a faint, flickering light. The light flickered, soft and warm, barely visible through the trees. It was the kind of glow that immediately made you think of safety. A campfire, maybe, or someone's cabin. Somewhere I could get directions, or at least some help. But the stranger's warning echoed in my head. "If you see it, do not follow it." I faltered, my feet rooted to the dirt trail. The light seemed to pulse slightly, swaying like it was being carried. I told myself it was probably just a hiker, someone who knew the woods better than I did, someone who could guide me back. Still, my gut told me to stay put. "Is there anyone here?" I called out, my voice unsteady and trembling. The light stopped moving. I took a step back, gripping the flashlight like it could protect me. "I'm lost," I shouted. "Can you help me?" The forest answered with silence, and then the light started moving again, weaving gently between the trees. It didn't bounce like a flashlight or sway like a lantern held by someone walking. It floated, smooth and deliberate. I should have turned around. I should have ignored it. But the longer I stared, the more it felt like it was pulling me forward. I took a hesitant step toward it, then another. My heart was hammering, and my palms were slick with sweat. Every step felt heavier, like the ground itself was trying to hold me back, but I couldn't stop. The light drifted further into the woods, and I followed. My flashlight beamed useless against the overwhelming darkness. The forest around me felt wrong, too quiet, too still. "Hey!" I called again, my voice cracking. "Wait!" The light didn't stop. I stumbled over a root, nearly dropping the flashlight, and when I looked up again, the light was closer than I expected. It wasn't far now, just beyond a thicket of bushes. I froze as I realized what I was seeing. The light wasn't a lantern. It wasn't even a flame. It hovered in the air, a perfect sphere of glowing amber, pulsating faintly like a heartbeat. It swayed gently, almost invitingly, and for a moment, I forgot the stranger's warning entirely. I reached out. The moment my hand moved toward it, the air around me seemed to shift. The warmth of the light vanished, replaced by an icy chill that sliced through my jacket. The trees seemed to press closer, their twisted branches reaching down like skeletal hands. And then I heard it. A voice. No, several voices, all whispering at once. The sound was soft and rhythmic, like a song just below the edge of hearing. The words didn't make sense, but they wrapped around my thoughts, squeezing them until they were the only thing I could focus on. The light pulsed brighter, and the whispers grew louder. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The whispers stopped. The light blinked out, plunging me into absolute darkness. And then something moved behind me. The sound came again, slow, deliberate, like something heavy shifting across the forest floor. My breath caught, and I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my grip. Its narrow beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing there. "Who's out there?" I called, trying to keep the panic from my voice. No answer. The forest was so still it felt unnatural, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. The faint rustle of leaves I had heard before was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against my ears. I backed up slowly, trying to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same. The trees seemed closer now, their gnarled branches reaching toward me like crooked fingers. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow dart between the trunks. "Who's here?" I called again, my voice cracking. Then I heard it, a low, guttural sound that made my stomach drop. It wasn't quite a growl, but it wasn't human either. It came from somewhere behind me, deep in the woods, and it sent a cold shiver racing down my spine. I turned and ran. My boots pounded against the dirt trail, but the path was uneven, roots and rocks threatening to trip me at every step. I kept the flashlight trained in front of me, its weak beam barely illuminating the way. My lungs burned, and my heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. The growl came again, closer this time. I glanced back, and my stomach churned. There was something there, just at the edge of the light, a shape too tall, too thin, its movements jerky and unnatural. I stumbled, hitting the ground hard. My flashlight skittered out of my hand, the beam spinning wildly before coming to a stop, pointing into the woods. I scrambled forward to grab it, and that was when I saw the light again. It had returned, hovering just beyond the trees, pulsing faintly like it was alive. But now there were more of them, dozens of glowing orbs floating in the distance, swaying gently like fireflies. The whispers returned, louder this time, and I froze. The words were clearer now, almost intelligible, and they pulled at my thoughts, filling my head with an overwhelming sense of dread. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, clutching the flashlight. The orbs pulsed in unison, brighter and brighter, until they vanished all at once, leaving me alone in the dark. But I wasn't alone. A branch snapped to my right, and then another to my left. Whatever had been following me was circling now, closing in. The growling sound rose again, more guttural and layered, like several voices all speaking at once. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, my hands trembling, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Eyes. Dozens of glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness, unblinking and inhuman. The eyes were everywhere. They glowed faintly, reflecting the weak beam of my flashlight, their shapes inhuman and scattered at impossible heights and angles. Some were low to the ground, others high in the trees, and all of them were fixed on me. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt like they were made of lead, rooted to the spot even as my instincts screamed at me to run. "Who's there?" I shouted, though the words fell hollow. I already knew this wasn't something that could answer. The growling rose again, a deep, guttural symphony of sounds coming from every direction. It was too much, too overwhelming, and I turned and bolted. The forest around me was alive with movement. Branches snapped, leaves rustled, and the ground trembled underfoot. Whatever these things were, they weren't just watching anymore, they were following. I ran blindly, my flashlight bobbing wildly as I stumbled over roots and rocks. The eyes were everywhere, flickering in the periphery of my vision no matter how far I went. "Please!" I shouted into the void. "Leave me alone!" The only response was the whispering. It returned, louder than before, the voices overlapping in an incomprehensible chorus that filled my mind. The words didn't make sense, but they pressed against my thoughts, seeping into the cracks like water into stone. I tripped, falling hard onto my knees. The flashlight slipped from my grasp, and the beam rolled, casting the forest into strange, shifting shadows. I scrambled to grab it, but before I could, I saw the light again. Not the flashlight. It hovered ahead of me, flickering softly, almost invitingly. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I found myself crawling toward it despite the overwhelming fear clawing at my chest. "No," I whispered to myself, shaking my head. "No, I can't." But the light pulsed, and for a moment, the forest went silent. The eyes in the darkness faded, the growling stopped, and I was left in an eerie stillness that felt worse than the chaos. The lantern swayed, its glow warm and gentle, and the whispers softened into a low hum. It was soothing now, almost comforting, and I felt the tension in my muscles begin to ease. I rose to my feet, my breathing slowing as I took a hesitant step forward. Then another. The light seemed to pull me closer, promising safety, relief, an end to the nightmare. Just as I was about to reach out, the whispers changed. They weren't soft anymore. They were sharp, angry, and growing louder by the second. The warmth of the lantern faded, replaced by a cold, biting chill that made my skin crawl. The light flared suddenly, blinding me, and I stumbled back. When my vision cleared, the lantern was gone, and standing in its place was a figure. The figure was shrouded in shadows, its outline barely visible against the faint glow that lingered where the lantern had been. It was tall, too tall, and impossibly thin, its limbs stretched unnaturally long. I stood frozen, my breath coming in shallow gasps as the figure tilted its head, almost curiously. It took a single step forward, and the whispers that had filled the forest before now sharpened into a single word, hissed and insisted. "Come." "No," I whispered, shaking my head. My voice cracked, barely audible. The figure took another step, its movements smooth and fluid, like it wasn't constrained by bones or muscles. The glow around it pulsed, illuminating the gnarled trees and twisted shadows that now seemed to lean toward me. "Stay back," I shouted, gripping the flashlight tightly as if it could somehow protect me. The figure paused, its head tilting the other way, as though considering me. Then, without warning, it surged forward. I turned and ran, the sound of snapping branches and rustling leaves exploding behind me. The flashlight's beam jumped wildly as I sprinted through the trees, the uneven ground threatening to trip me with every step. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic, overlapping in a falter that filled my ears and drowned out my thoughts. The figure wasn't far behind. I could feel it, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. "Help me!" I screamed into the void, though I knew no one would hear. The forest felt alive now, the trees closing in as if trying to trap me. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I couldn't stop. Every instinct screamed that if I stopped, it would catch me. Then I saw it, a break in the trees ahead. The faintest hint of moonlight spilled through the canopy, marking an opening in the oppressive darkness. I ran toward it, hope flaring in my chest. If I could just get out of the trees, maybe I could escape whatever this thing was. I burst into the clearing, stumbling to a halt. The light was there again, hovering in the center of the open space. But this time, it wasn't alone. More lights appeared, dozens of them, flickering into existence one by one. They surrounded the clearing, swaying gently like will-o'-the-wisps. The whispers grew louder, the voices overlapping until they formed a rhythmic chant that made my head spin. And then I realized I wasn't alone. Figures emerged from the trees, stepping into the clearing one by one. They moved slowly, deliberately, their forms just as unnatural as the one that had chased me. Their glowing eyes locked onto me, and I felt my knees buckle under their gaze. I was surrounded. The clearing felt alive, pulsing with an energy that pressed against my skin like static electricity. The figures closed in slowly, their glowing eyes fixed on me, their bodies shifting and twisting in ways that defied logic. I stumbled backward, holding the flashlight out in front of me like a shield. "Stay back!" I shouted, though my voice cracked and wavered. The figures didn't stop. They moved in unison, their steps eerily synchronized, the rhythm matching the rising chant that filled the air. It wasn't in any language I knew, but the words carried a weight that pressed into my thoughts, making it harder to think, harder to breathe. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know what you want." The light in the center of the clearing flared brighter, and the chant rose to a deafening crescendo. The figures froze, standing just at the edge of the light's glow, their distorted forms silhouetted against the unnatural brightness. Then one by one, they turned their heads toward the largest figure, the one that had chased me. It stepped forward, its movements smooth and deliberate, and the chanting stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. The figure raised one impossibly long arm and pointed at me. "The lantern is chosen," it said, its voice deep and layered, like many voices speaking as one. My heart pounded as I stumbled back, my legs threatening to give out. "Chosen? For what?" It didn't answer. Instead, the light in the clearing began to pulse, and the ground beneath me seemed to shift, the dirt rippling like the surface of a disturbed pond. I tried to move, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My legs were rooted in place, held by some invisible force. The chanting resumed, softer now, but more focused, the voices wrapping around me like tendrils. The light in the center of the clearing split, forming into two smaller orbs that floated toward me. They swayed gently, their glow casting strange, flickering shadows across the figures that surrounded me. When the orbs reached me, they hovered just above my hands, their warmth in stark contrast to the icy chill that clung to the air. "Take them," the figure commanded. I shook my head violently. "No, I don't want this. I don't want any of this." The figures moved closer, their distorted forms closing the circle around me. The chanting grew louder, the orbs pulsing in time with the rhythm, and the weight of their presence bore down on me until it felt like my chest would collapse. I had no choice. My hands rose against my will, and the moment my fingers touched the orbs, the world around me erupted in light. A blinding flash consumed the clearing, and for a moment, I felt like I was falling, plunging through the earth, through the forest, through something far older and darker than I could comprehend. Then everything went still. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the clearing. I was somewhere else, somewhere worse. When my eyes fluttered open, I found myself lying on cold, damp ground. The air was thick and heavy, carrying the metallic tang of decay. I pushed myself up, every muscle in my body trembling, and looked around. This wasn't the forest anymore. The trees were gone, replaced by jagged, blackened spires that jutted out of the ground like the ribs of some ancient, rotting beast. The sky above was a swirling mass of deep red and inky black, streaked with flashes of white light that didn't seem to illuminate anything. The air itself seemed alive, vibrating faintly with an energy that made my skin crawl. What is this place?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the distant hum that filled the air. There was no answer, but I felt it before I saw it. A presence, vast and overwhelming, pressing down on me from all directions. The glow of the orbs still clung to my hands, their warmth now faint and fleeting, like the last embers of a dying fire. The ground beneath me shifted, the dark earth rippling like water. Shapes began to emerge from the haze, more figures, their forms twisted and unfamiliar, but larger, far larger than the ones in the clearing. Their movements were slow and deliberate, as if the air itself resisted their presence. And then I heard the voice again. "You have crossed." It was the same layered, inhuman voice that had spoken in the clearing, But here it was deeper, louder, resonating through the ground and the air and my very bones. Crossed into what? I shouted, panic breaking through my fear. What is this place? What do you want from me? The ground shifted again, and one of the towering figures moved closer. Its face, or what should have been its face, was featureless, a void of blackness surrounded by faint, flickering lights. It raised a spindly arm, and the orbs in my hands flared brightly, burning my skin. I cried out, trying to drop them, but my fingers wouldn't release. You carry the light, the voice said. You will open the gate. The gate. The words filled me with a cold dread, though I didn't understand why. I shook my head violently, stumbling backward. No, I'm not opening anything. The figure tilted its head, the faint light swirling faster around its void-like face. The lantern is chosen. You cannot refuse. I turned and ran. The ground beneath me rippled with every step, making it nearly impossible to keep my balance. The jagged spires loomed closer, their sharp edges glinting faintly in the strange light. The towering figures didn't move quickly, but their presence followed me, their gaze, if they even had eyes, bearing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. The orbs in my hands pulsed again, their heat growing unbearable. The whispers returned, sharper now, stabbing at my thoughts. They weren't words anymore. They were images, flashes of things I couldn't comprehend. A massive, yawning void, endless spirals of light and shadow. Something vast and formless, writhing in the dark. I tripped, falling hard against the cold ground. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs, and for a moment I couldn't move. The whispers stopped. When I looked up, I saw it. The gate. It was enormous, a towering construct of shifting light and shadow, its surface covered in symbols that glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the orbs in my hands. It radiated an energy so intense that I could feel it pressing against my skin, pulling at me. And standing before it was another figure, larger than the rest, its form impossible to describe. It wasn't just a shape. It was a feeling, an overwhelming sense of hunger and despair that seeped into my very soul. The way must be opened, the voice said, louder now, resonating from the gate itself. I clutched the orbs tightly, tears streaming down my face. Please, I begged. I don't want this. Let me go. The figure didn't respond. It raised a hand, and the symbols on the gate flared to life, their glow blinding. The ground beneath me shook violently, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. And then, the gate began to open. The ground shook beneath me, and the blinding light from the gate swallowed everything in sight. It wasn't warm or inviting. This light burned, sharp and relentless, searing into my mind as if it were peeling away layers of my thoughts. The orbs in my hands pulsed wildly, their heat unbearable. I tried to let go, to fling them away, but they were fused to my skin, their glow syncing with the gate's violent rhythm. The massive figure before the gate moved, its form twisting and shifting like smoke caught in a storm. It raised its arms toward the gate, and the strange symbols carved into its surface flared even brighter, each one pulsating in time with an inaudible, maddening beat. The way must be opened, the voice thundered again, reverberating through the air and my very bones. No! I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the chaos surrounding me. I didn't agree to this. Let me go. The towering figures that had pursued me into this place were gathered now, forming a wide circle around the gate. They chanted in unison, their guttural tones resonating in a rhythm that felt ancient and wrong. Each word they spoke seemed to push the gate open further, the crack in its surface widening to reveal nothing but endless darkness beyond. But this wasn't an empty void. The darkness moved. It writhed and twisted, shifting in ways my mind couldn't fully comprehend. Shapes emerged and disappeared within it, vast, otherworldly forms that defied logic and reason. They pressed against the opening, straining to break free, and the whispers returned, sharper and more insistent. The orbs burned brighter, their glow spilling over my hands and into the ground. I felt the pull again, stronger now, dragging me toward the gate. My legs refused to move, but the force was relentless, yanking me closer with each passing second. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "You don't need me. Just let me go." The massive figure turned toward me, its void-like face impossible to read, but heavy with intent. It raised one elongated hand and pointed at me, and the chant from the circle of figures ceased abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. "You are the key," the voice intoned. I shook my head violently, trying to fight the pull. "No, I don't want this. I didn't choose this." The figures in the circle began to move, their synchronized steps creating a pattern that rippled across the ground. The symbols on the gate shifted again, their light growing brighter, more blinding. The pull intensified, and I stumbled forward, my hands raising against my will. The orbs pulsed one final time, their glow merging with the light of the gate. The moment they connected, a shockwave ripped through the air, throwing me to the ground. I looked up, and my heart stopped. The gate was fully open now, its massive doors swinging outward to reveal the churning void beyond. From within the darkness, something began to emerge, a shape so vast it dwarfed even the towering figures around me. It was formless yet deliberate, its movements slow and calculated, and every step it took made the ground quake. The whispers became screams, filling the air with an unbearable noise that clawed at my mind. The massive figure that had stood before the gate fell to its knees, bowing low as the entity stepped through. And then it turned its attention to me. The entity loomed above me, its form impossibly vast and shifting, a mass of writhing shapes and pulsating lights that seemed to exist in defiance of reality. It had no face, no features, yet I felt its attention bearing down on me, its presence sinking into my mind like claws. The whispers had become a deafening roar, an overwhelming dissonance that pressed against my thoughts, drowning out everything else. My body trembled, and my vision blurred as I tried to crawl away, but the ground beneath me rippled like liquid, refusing to let me escape. The towering figures surrounding the gate fell to their knees one by one, their heads bowing low as the entity stepped fully into this world. Its presence was suffocating, filling the air with an oppressive weight that made it impossible to breathe. I clutched at the orbs in my hands, now dull and lifeless, their warmth completely gone. "Why me?" I choked out, my voice barely audible over the chaos. "What do you want from me?" The entity's form shifted, stretching and condensing in ways that made my stomach churn. Then, in a voice that was not a voice but a feeling, a vast, cold force pressing into my thoughts, it spoke. "You have opened the way. You are the vessel." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I cried out, collapsing onto the ground. The figures around the gate began to chant again, their guttural voices rising in unison, and the entity moved closer, its shifting mass descending toward me. "No!" I screamed, scrambling backward. "I didn't ask for this. I don't want this." But it didn't stop. A tendril of shadow from its form, writhing and twisting as it reached for me. The closer it got, the colder the air became, until every breath felt like ice cutting into my lungs. I tried to move, to fight, but my body was frozen in place. They coiled around me, cold and heavy, and I felt my thoughts begin to slip away, unraveling like threads pulled from a fraying rope. Memories flooded my mind in a chaotic blur, flashes of my life, my family, the choices that had led me here. Each one was torn away as the entity's presence consumed me, leaving behind only a void where my sense of self had been. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, and the ground beneath me trembled violently. The entity began to rise, lifting me with it, and I felt myself being pulled toward the churning void of the gate. "No," I whispered weakly, tears streaming down my face. "Please no." But the entity didn't listen. As I was dragged closer to the gate, the shadows around me thickened, wrapping around my body like a shroud. The world blurred, the light from the gate growing brighter and brighter until it was all I could see. And then, just as I was about to be pulled through, the chanting stopped. The figures froze, their heads snapping toward the gate as a low, rumbling sound filled the air. The tendrils around me loosened slightly, and I felt a faint flicker of hope. The entity paused, its massive form turning toward the source of the sound. Something was coming, something on the other side of the gate. The rumbling grew louder, deeper, resonating through the very ground beneath me. The loosened further, its massive form faltered as it turned toward the gaping void of the gate. The figures surrounding us began to shift uneasily, their synchronized movements faltering for the first time. Their glowing eyes darted toward the gate, toward whatever was approaching from the other side. And then I saw it. From within the darkness, another shape began to emerge. It was smaller than the entity, but no less terrifying. Its form sharp and jagged, with edges that seemed to slice through the air itself. Its movements were swift and deliberate, as though it had been waiting for this moment. The entity let out a sound. Not a roar, but something deeper, a vibration that shook the air and made my teeth ache. It withdrew from me completely, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I could breathe again. The new figure stepped through the gate, its presence rippling across the clearing like a shockwave. The symbols on the gate flared once more, their glow casting everything in a stark, unnatural light. The towering figures around us dropped to the ground, their forms convulsing as though they were being torn apart from within. I scrambled backward, my body weak and trembling, as the two entities faced each other. The air between them shimmered, bending and twisting like heat rising from pavement, and the whispers began anew. But this time, they weren't directed at me. The two beings collided with a force that shook the ground, their forms twisting and merging in a chaotic dance of light and shadow. The gate pulsed wildly, the symbols flickering erratically, and I felt the pull of it once again. "No," I whispered, clutching at the ground as the force dragged me closer. "Not again." The struggle between the two entities intensified, their movements violent and unpredictable. The smaller one seemed to be pushing the larger entity back toward the gate, its jagged form cutting through the darkness with precision and purpose. And then, with a blinding flash, the smaller figure plunged itself into the larger one, forcing both of them back through the gate. The air erupted in a deafening roar as the gate began to collapse, its massive doors swinging shut with a final, resounding crash. The symbols faded, their light extinguished, and the world fell into silence. I lay there, unable to move, staring up at the swirling sky. The oppressive weight that had filled the air was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. The towering figures had vanished, leaving nothing behind but the jagged spires of the strange landscape. And then I felt it, the warmth of the orbs in my hands, faint but unmistakable. I looked down and saw them glowing softly, their light no longer harsh or burning. A voice echoed in my mind, faint and distant. "The gate is closed for now." I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. The forest returned in a blink, the jagged spires replaced by trees, the swirling sky above replaced by faint stars. I was back in the clearing, lying on the cold earth, the lantern's glow flickering softly beside me. I stood on shaky legs, the orbs in my hands now gone, their warmth lingering faintly on my skin. The forest was silent, save for the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Without another word, I turned and ran, leaving the clearing and the lantern behind. I don't know how I found my way out of the woods that night. Somehow, I ended up on the edge of a dirt road, where a passing driver stopped and offered me a ride. I didn't tell them what had happened. I didn't think they would believe me. But as the car drove away from the woods, I couldn't help but glance back. And there, at the edge of the trees, I saw it, a faint, flickering light, swaying gently in the darkness.